Now, let's talk about a little bit of the excitement of some of the things that were in here. Stan Lee was the father of the X-Men. And here is a X-Man number 8, which means it was the 8th X-Man to come out. And this one is signed by Stan Lee, which is neat. He signed a lot of comics, but this is signed by him. And it's been graded. So it's in a plastic slab. And so that kind of takes away the arbitrariness and the risk of buying something online because it's been graded by a good outfit. This one is CCG. It has their hologram here. And so it's not a bad grading system at all. And it's number 8, the X-Men, so it was the 8th one to come out. Now, if that wasn't good enough, what's better than X-Man number 8 in the uncanny thread of the Untouchables is X-Man number 1. So, this is the first X-Man comic book, and it is graded a 2.5, so it's not, 10 is the best, so it's not as good a condition as the other one, but it is X-Man number 1, and it is signed by Stan Lee. So to me, that's exciting. And part of the reasons I bought this, it had a lot of good early comic books that I remember in there. And so this one was put out in 1963, so I was just a kid at the time and looking to sneak somebody else's comic books in to read in the dark with a flashlight undercover. But it's a cool comic book. And so there was a lot of early stuff in this collection, but I don't think we're going to find it in box 17. Grading is a good evil, if there's such a thing. Grading gives it's an independent third-party service that for a living, they go and grade your comic book or your baseball card or your autograph, your whatever, based on a certain set of criteria. And that's supposed to be consistent from comic to comic to comic that the grading service goes through. Generally, a 7 in one grading company isn't necessarily a 7 in another grading company, though, and that's where some of the larger disparities start showing up. So you may say, oh, I can send it to XYZ agency, get a 7, but these other guys are harder and won't give me a 7. But at the end of the day, some grading services are valued higher than others when it comes to their opinion. So that probably balances out. But a 7 is not always a 7. The other thing is grading can get very expensive. And the grading services are generally now charging by the dollar value you perceive something is worth. So if you have a $100,000 comic, it's not going to cost the same as grading a $1 comic, and you wouldn't want to get a $1 comic graded. So if you have a comic that's worth in the hundreds and you're not an experienced comic dealer and you put it online, it's probably not going to be valued anywhere near what a grading agency would value it at, because somebody's taking risk in what they're buying. On the other hand, that gets to be tricky when you're being asked to pay for how you perceive the value of that item is, and it can get very expensive. I know I just want to get some photographs authenticated by a grading service, and what they do is they put them in plastic like the others I show you, and you can easily break it out of there. It doesn't ruin the value. But once it's graded, they generally tend to encase something. And in the photo business, there's an extra charge for that casing that can be $50 to $75. So grading starts based on sending it off, how quick you want to get it back. Some people make you buy a membership, so that's another fee. And then based on your membership level, they charge money. And then if you're at a show and you want to grade it and you want it turned around quickly, there's a whole nother fee process to that. So it's expensive. I wouldn't recommend it for the everyday person getting involved in something. And you may be disappointed to find out how tough the criteria is to get a card or a comic graded. And you may think you have, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 being great, and you may think it's a 10, but it comes, which means it's mint, a top mint item, and it comes back, or you think it's a 7, so let's say it's a near mint, but it comes back as a 5, which is very good or something. So you got to be ready for disappointment, and you are committing a lot of money up front to get something graded. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to understand that condition is everything, and that a grade 5 versus 6 could add a huge amount of value, especially if you get into the near mint to mint, because the grading services keep track of how much of something they grade. And let's say you get a 10 comic book, they know how many they've graded as a 10. And you may all of a sudden be able to say it's 5 out of 10,000 they graded. And on coins, that puts an enormous price difference. I mean, the whole grading system of coins was thought around to be a 1 versus a 70. So a 70 coin was worth 70 times more than a 1. In reality, it's worth, if it's a scarce coin, it could be thousands of times more. So the premium in coins, just from a 65 to 70 versus a 60, it gets exponentially increasing. So you may start with a $50 penny, but because it's graded a 70, it may be 1 of 10,000 graded, and all of a sudden a huge premium's on that coin. So it's not just an easy equation, but you have to look at prices as a graded condition, and what does it bring in a comic book in a 10 versus a 2. And as I said, in Spider-Man, the difference could be $5,000 versus $100,000. So do you have a $5,000 comic or a $100,000 comic? It's not quite that easy. Now, what is better than X-Man #1? Spider-Man #1. So to me, the whole Spider-Man set was in here, and I sold most of them. There's more I still need to dig out in here, but I was not going to sell Spider-Man #1. I will never sell Spider-Man #1. In this one, it's not in near mint condition by any stretch of the imagination, but I would say it's probably worth $5,000, which is close to what I paid for the whole load of comics. So this is a gem to me, even though it's not in gem condition. It will always be Spider-Man #1, and that was the whole attraction, this and some of the early X-Men stuff, to get into my collection of stuff. I'm not a huge comic book collector, but I can appreciate Spider-Man and X-Men.